Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. We're going to be tackling DIY tiling today. A lot of you have expressed interest in learning more about this, and we thought it would be fun to dive into it.
Yeah, it's a really popular topic, and
Yeah,
for good reason.
it can be pretty intimidating though, right?
Yeah.
Where do you even begin?
Totally. There's a lot to consider, from choosing the right tiles to making sure you prep everything correctly. It can be overwhelming for sure.
That's why we're here though, to break it all down and make it a little less daunting. For this deep dive, we actually came across this really interesting YouTube video from a channel based in Vancouver. They focus on home building and renovation, and they have a whole series on tiling. The only catch is it's all in Chinese. But don't worry, we've watched it, and we're going to distill all the key insights for you, so you don't have to miss out on any of the juicy details.
Yeah, it's packed with useful tips and some surprising things I didn't even know about tiling. Like, did you know that in Canada, tiling is often the very first step in finishing a home?
Really? I would have thought it would be something like painting or installing fixtures.
Me too. But apparently they do the tiling first, which just shows how crucial this step is to get right.
Wow, that's interesting. So I'm guessing choosing the right tile is probably super important then.
Absolutely. But here's a little surprise. In Canada, you can often use the same tile for both walls and floors.
Wait, seriously? I always thought wall and floor tiles were completely different.
Right. It was news to me too. Apparently the standards are a bit different there.
Huh. The more you know. What about outdoor tiling, though? I'm assuming those are different.
Yeah, outdoor tiles definitely have their own set of requirements. They need to be more durable and weather resistant, of course.
Makes sense. So what are some of the things we need to keep in mind when choosing tiles? Like, are there any pitfalls we should be aware of?
Well, one thing they really stressed in the video is that Canada uses inches for tile measurement. But some imported tiles, especially from other parts of the world, use centimeters. And it's super important not to assume those measurements are equivalent, because even a tiny difference can throw off your grout lines, and that can be a real pain to fix later.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. I'll definitely be double-checking those measurements from now on.
Good plan. And speaking of grout, they also talked about how the color you choose can completely change the look of your tiled surface. You can either go for a grout that blends in seamlessly with the tile, or choose a contrasting color to make the tile pattern really pop. It all depends on the aesthetic you're going for.
Okay, so color choice is key. Noted. So let's say I've picked out my perfect tiles and grout. What's next? Just start laying them down.
Not so fast. They really emphasize the importance of properly prepping the base, which is usually the subfloor. If you don't prep the subfloor correctly, you're basically asking for trouble down the line. You could end up with cracked tiles, hollow sounds, all sorts of issues that you really don't want to deal with.
Yikes, that sounds like a nightmare. So what does proper subfloor prep entail?
Well, in Canada, they typically use a special primer and this really interesting thing called a CI anti-crack membrane.
Anti-crack membrane, what's that?
It's basically a protective layer that bonds with the primer and the subfloor to prevent future cracking. They showed a close-up of it in the video, and it looked pretty high-tech.
Wow, that's cool. Is that standard practice in Canada?
It seems to be pretty common, at least from what I gathered from the video, and they said it can significantly increase the lifespan of your tiled floors, which is a huge plus.
That makes total sense. It's like an insurance policy for your tiles.
Yeah.
But they mentioned something different for bathrooms, right?
Yeah, in bathrooms, they usually use waterproof paper instead of the anti-crack membrane, just because of the higher moisture levels in those areas. They actually have a whole separate video dedicated to bathroom waterproofing, which could be a fun one to dive into later.
Okay, we'll have to add that to our list. So far, we've talked about tile choice, grout, and subfloor prep. What other hidden traps should we be aware of?
Once you've got all your materials sorted, the video really stresses the importance of planning your layout before you lay down a single tile. It's tempting to just jump in and start tiling, but trust me, you'll be glad you took the time to plan it out properly.
Okay, so planning is key. Got it. What kind of planning are we talking about?
They talked about creating a level layout drawing, which basically ensures that your tile lines up perfectly with your ceiling and wall designs. It makes a huge difference in achieving a cohesive look, especially in a kitchen or bathroom where everything needs to flow visually.
Right, it's all about those finishing touches. So no pressure. What about the tile pattern itself? Any tips on that front?
They mention the need for balance between randomness and repetition in the pattern to create a visually appealing design. It's like a puzzle, figuring out how to arrange the tiles in a way that's both interesting and harmonious.
Interesting. I've never really thought about tile patterns in that way before.
Yeah, it's actually quite fascinating. They even mentioned that some high-end projects use custom-made grout to really elevate the design.
Wow, custom grout. That's next level. Okay, so we've got our layout plan, materials ready to go, and now I'm itching to get tiling. What's the lowdown on the actual tiling techniques?
Well, the first thing is they use pre-mixed mortar, which seems to be the standard in Canada. But here's the thing. You need a specific type of mortar with added adhesive for both the back of the tile and the subfloor.
Wait, so there are different types of mortar? I had no idea.
Yep, and they were pretty specific about which type to use. They also demonstrated this cool technique called back buttering, where you basically spread the mortar on the back of each tile before placing it.
Back buttering, huh? That sounds interesting. Is it tricky to do?
They made it look pretty easy, but I'm sure it takes some practice to get it just right.
Hey, Pet. Anything else I should know about this back buttering technique?
Yeah, they emphasized using a rubber hammer and a level to ensure that each tile is placed perfectly flush and level.
Makes sense. And what about those little spacers I've seen people use? What are those called?
Oh, those are called spacer lugs. They're super important for maintaining those nice, even grout lines. It's all about precision, my friend.
Precision. Got it. So we've laid down the tiles, meticulously spaced them out, and now grout time.
You got it. Grouting is the final step in this tiling saga. They use a rubber grout float to work it in, making sure to clean up any excess immediately with a sponge. They said it's important to use a rubber float to avoid scratching the tiles.
Good tip. Wait a second. Have we been talking about indoor tiling this whole time? What about outdoor tiling?
You're right. We've been focused on indoor tiling so far. Let's shift gears and talk about what they cover for outdoor spaces, which, as you might guess, has some key differences.
I bet. So let's dive into the wild world of outdoor tiling. What do they say about that?
Well, first of all, they really doubled down on the waterproofing outside. Think a double layer of waterproof strip A&D waterproof paper. No moisture is getting through that barrier.
Wow, that's intense.
And instead of that fancy anti-crack membrane, they use a metal mesh for outdoor applications. It adds some serious stability.
Makes sense. Outdoor conditions can be pretty harsh, so you need something that can hold up.
Exactly. They also said that the mortar for outdoor tiles needs to be thicker to withstand the elements and provide a more durable bond.
So it's like heavy-duty mortar.
Pretty much. They showed the consistency, and it looked almost like cement.
Wow, that's serious stuff. Any other surprises about outdoor tiling?
Actually, yes. They mentioned that if you're using larger outdoor tiles, you have to lay them from the bottom up, letting each row dry completely before moving on to the next.
Oh, wow, that sounds pretty time-consuming.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer of complexity to the process.
Speaking of time, I'm curious about the cost breakdown for all of this. Is tiling a budget-friendly DIY project?
Well, this is where things get interesting. They pointed out that in Canada, the labor cost for tiling can actually be higher than the cost of the materials themselves.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's pretty surprising. I would have thought the materials would be the biggest expense.
Me too. But it really highlights the skill and effort involved in getting a professional quality tiling job done.
Absolutely. So it's not just about the cost of the tiles and grout. It's about valuing the expertise of those who really know their stuff.
Exactly. They really drove home the point that a job well done isn't just about a clean surface. It's about the meticulous preparation, the attention to detail, and the pride in craftsmanship that goes into every step of the process.
I love that. It's a reminder that sometimes it's worth investing in the expertise of a pro. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this video has definitely given me a lot to think about. It seems like tiling is one of those projects where you need to honestly assess your skills and patience before diving in.
For sure. But hey, even if you decide to go the professional route, having this insider knowledge will help you appreciate the work that goes into creating that beautiful tiled surface, right?
Absolutely. It's like a whole new level of understanding and appreciation for the craft.
Exactly. All right, we've covered a ton of ground in this first part of our tiling deep dive, but we're just getting started. After a quick break, we'll be back to explore even more insights from this fascinating video. Stick around.
Yeah, there's still so much more to talk about.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm still thinking about that whole thing about labor costs being higher than the materials themselves for tiling. It really makes you appreciate the skill involved, huh?
It does. I mean, they're not just putting down tiles, they're creating a functional work of art. That has to last, too.
Absolutely. Speaking of the artistry of tiling, I was fascinated by what they said about patterns in the video.
Oh, yeah, the patterns. Who knew there was so much thought that goes into arranging,
Or it's not just slapping them down in a grid, apparently.
Definitely not. They were talking about balancing randomness and repetition to create a visually appealing design. It's like a rhythm, they said, almost like music.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It makes you look at tile patterns in a whole new way. Makes me think, though, if I were to try tiling myself, what are some of the biggest mistakes to watch out for?
Good question. And actually, the video covers some common DIY tiling blunders. One of the biggest ones is rushing the prep work. It's tempting to just jump into the tiling, but if you neglect the subfloor prep, oh, you're going to have problems later on.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier, like cracked tiles and hollow sounds. Definitely don't want to deal with that. So no cutting corners on the prep work. What else should DIYers be careful about?
Another common mistake is not using the right type of mortar. We mentioned this before, but you need the specific type with the adhesive for both the tile and the subfloor. Otherwise, the bond won't be strong enough and the tiles could come loose.
Okay, mortar matters. Got it. What about the actual placement of the tiles? Any tips on that?
Patience, patience, patience. That's what they emphasize in the video. Don't rush it. Take your time with each tile, make sure it's placed correctly. They use those spacer lugs and constantly check with the level to get everything perfect.
Precision is key. I'm sensing a theme here. I can see how that would be challenging for someone like me, not exactly known for my patience.
Haha. Well, practice makes perfect, and it's worth it to get it right. Another mistake they mentioned is people not mixing the grout properly. It has to be the right consistency. Too thin and it won't hold the tiles, too thick and it's a nightmare to work with.
Wow, grout mixing. Who knew it was so important?
Right, it's like the unsung hero of tiling. And speaking of unsung heroes, they also talked about cleaning up excess grout immediately. If you let it dry, it can stain the tiles and make a huge mess.
Oh, good point. So basically every step of the process needs careful attention to detail.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder if those home improvement shows are giving people unrealistic expectations.
You're reading my mind. They make it look so easy and breezy.
Right. But in reality, there's so much more to it.
You know what? This whole deep dive is making me think that tiling is kind of like a metaphor for life.
Oh, how so?
It's all about preparation, patience, attention to detail.
I like that. And realizing there's always more to learn, even when you think you know the basics.
Exactly. Like that whole mortar thing, I had no idea.
Right. It's about being open to new information, asking questions, not being afraid to admit you don't know something.
And even if you decide to hire a pro, at least you'll understand the process better and appreciate the work that goes into it.
Definitely. It's about being an informed consumer, valuing expertise.
So, as we wrap up this part of our tiling adventure, what's been your biggest takeaway so far?
Honestly, it's just realizing how much I didn't know about something that seems so simple on the surface. Tiling is a whole art form.
I agree. And it makes you appreciate that smooth, tiled surface so much more.
Absolutely. It's like this hidden world of craftsmanship that we usually take for granted.
And now we're in on the secret. And we're back for the final part of our tiling deep dive. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It has. Who knew there were so many layers to tiling?
Seriously. You know, thinking back to all those tips and techniques from the video, I'm curious, what do you think they would say is the absolute most important thing for a DIY tiler to keep in mind?
That's a good one. If I had to pick just one thing, I think it would have to be patience.
Patience.
Yeah, they emphasized it throughout the whole video, didn't they? Patience with prepping the subfloor, patience with laying each tile, patience with the grout, even with cleaning up afterwards.
You're right. Patience is definitely a recurring theme.
Yeah.
But why do you think it's so crucial for tiling specifically?
Well, tiling demands a lot of precision and attention to detail, doesn't it? It's not something you can just rush through and expect it to look perfect. Each step kind of builds on the last one. So if you make a mistake early on, it can snowball into a much bigger problem later.
Yeah, like a domino effect, one tile off can throw the whole thing out of whack.
Exactly. And they even said that experienced tilers make mistakes sometimes. The key is to catch them early and fix them before they become a real headache. And that takes patience, a good eye for detail, maybe a little bit of perfectionism too.
It's not just about having the technical skills. It's about having the right mindset too. Like you said, being patient, paying attention.
Right. It's almost meditative, being present in each moment, focusing on getting it right.
I like that. No cutting corners. Just taking the time to do it properly.
And, I think that's a lesson that goes beyond just tiling,
Oh, absolutely. It applies to so many things in life.
It's about approaching any task, whether it's fixing something or creating something, with that same level of care.
And attention to detail, taking pride in your work, even if nobody else sees all the effort you put in.
Yeah, like with that subfloor prep hidden under everything, but so important for the whole thing to work.
That's such a great point.
Yeah.
You know, this whole deep dive has really changed how I see tiling. I used to think it was pretty straightforward, but now I realize it's a true art form.
Me too. It requires skill, patience, creativity.
Yeah?
Even if I never become a master tiler myself, I have so much more respect for the people who do this.
Me too. So for any of our listeners out there who are feeling inspired to give tiling a try, what would be your one piece of advice for them?
I would say go for it. But be realistic about your expectations. Do your research, watch videos, maybe even practice on a small area first. And remember, patience is key.
Great advice. And if you decide it's not for you, that's okay too. There are plenty of amazing professionals out there who can help you create the tiled space of your dreams.
Exactly. The most important thing is to find what works best for you and your home.
Well said. It looks like we've come to the end of our tiling deep dive. I hope everyone learned a thing or two and maybe even had some fun along the way.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you and with all our listeners.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time, happy tiling.